Welcome to the Mom Founders Table. Pull up a chair and join me every week as I become your thought partner and help you lead to create change. I'm your host, Kelsey Kenry, entrepreneur, millionaire mom of three, and strategic business coach for established mom entrepreneurs. Every week, you will get tactical guidance to apply to your business, leadership, and life that will help you further your true success while also being invited into a new way of thinking and being that creates true freedom. I'm here to call you out and call you up, so take a seat and let's begin. So we have a saying in our house, and you probably heard it before, but it is teamwork makes the dream work. So welcome back to another episode of the Mom Founders Table, and this is part 2 of our 3-part series on parenting as an entrepreneur and how to be a better parent even when you're busy running a business. So in our first series episode, we talked about understanding anger and reactivity, and that is the emotion that so many of my clients and myself have experienced as entrepreneur moms because we are so busy and frankly just trying to do it all. And so I want to talk about today actually how we can build a better team with our partners so that we can parent better and so we can help that mental load that we are carrying. So let's give a warm welcome to my partner in crime, my personal teammate, Eric. Hey, how do you say your last name?
Ken like the doll, Rye like the bread.
It's like the beginning of every podcast episode I've ever done. Actually, the last one that I just did, she got it right. So
On the first try?
On the first try.
Wait.
She said that her team watched my stuff though. So anyways, if you don't know Eric is my husband of a zillion years. We are best friends. We have 3 beautiful children, and we believe in operating in our partnership as a team. And we want to share with you guys, beyond what we talked about in our marriage series, in the parenting series today, all about what we do, how we do that, and some helpful tips for you from Eric, because he is a parenting coach. He is helping angry dads become chill dads, because wouldn't life be great if we got to live in houses as children where we weren't being yelled at all the time? What would that be like? So let's get into it. So I mentioned earlier when I was doing this little intro about feeling like we have to do it all. And Eric actually mentioned it in our last episode about how we are control freaks. Let's just be honest. That's one of the things that why we go into an entrepreneurship. We're we don't want anybody telling us what to do or how to do it. We just want to make the rules. We want the freedom until that freedom is really, really heavy. But all that being said, we're control freaks. And so we see this roll into our parenting. And I literally remember when Cameron, our oldest, was born, and the first time Eric changed a diaper, I was inside of him, hovering and being so afraid. Everything that he did with Cameron, I had to micromanage and make sure that he knew how to, because apparently I somehow knew what I was doing, even though I'd never had a kid before. Anyways, we're control freaks. We micromanage, and we are suffering because we are trying to do it all. Babe, what happens from your perspective when the wife, the mom, is trying to do it all and doesn't trust the dad?
Before I answer that question, I have to call you out. There's a little bit of revisionist history at play here. Not only did she hover over me with Cameron, but she did a bit of hovering for all 3 kids. And now it got better as time went on. However, even with our last, with Emmy, she was very critical of my usage of the wipes. I always used too many wipes for her taste, and she always mentioned it. I also use a lot of paper towels when I clean. I also use a lot of paper towels when I clean the counters. I'm just very thorough. Okay. Not thrifty.
You just don't need that many wipes. That's all I'm saying.
That's your opinion. I have a different technique. I need to make sure, because I don't want any of it to touch my hand. So I make sure, like, I'm not squeamish, but I also don't want poop in my fingers. Anyways.
Kelsey, why are you guys broke? Oh, we have to buy 18 packs of wipes per day.
I don't think
my husband's technique.
I don't think our budget ever suffered because of the wipes. Okay. Even paper towels. It was never an issue. So I think as a man, one of the biggest issues, and maybe this is my personal bias speaking, but I think it's very emasculating when a woman tells their husband what to do all the time. There are some guys who need that, but for many of us, even if we don't know how to do it, we want to learn how to do it ourselves. But many of us lack the communication skills to tell our wives why it bothers us. Instead, we do other things, which I'm sure we'll talk about in this episode, that are not productive in a relationship. But I think that as a man, sometimes we just want to do it ourselves. Even if we mess it up, let us do it. Let us do it our way. And then after we're done, then we can talk about how we could have improved it. The constructive criticism has to wait, basically.
Yeah, I think there's a level of, like, obviously any sort of micromanagement comes from a place of there's a lack of trust, right? And so there's a certain point where when you're micromanaging, you have to realize how much you're putting on yourself and how that's your choice. It's like, does it really matter if the diaper's backwards? Does it really matter if the shoes don't match? You know what I mean? And I think that's, for me, who is like super controlling and wanted to micromanage every aspect of parenting. I just ran into a point where I'm like, I literally can't. Like, there's not enough time. And this is like putting so much pressure and stress on me that I have a person who is fully capable of doing beyond what I could expect that I'm not fully utilizing. And so I think in our experience, and maybe for a lot of moms, I think it's really just recognizing the behavior, right? Recognizing that, like, you're not actually asking for help in areas because you're so afraid that it's not going to look like you would do it.
I mean, from a business perspective, if you have employees, you can't hover over every single employee and make sure they do things exactly the way you want them done. Sometimes you got to let them mess up, and then you got to tell them after the fact, hey, you did this, but I'd rather you do this. Is that okay? You understand where I'm coming from? Cool. Yeah, sure. Whatever. I got that. And they're going to make mistakes. The man's going to make mistakes. The husband's going to make mistakes. The partner's going to make mistakes. But we have to learn by making those mistakes. And if you try to micromanage every single decision in the process, you are going to drive yourself crazy because you already got a bunch of stuff on your plate. You're just adding more. It would be much easier to delegate tasks, as always, especially in business, but to delegate tasks to your husband that you know he can handle. So why not teach him how to do these things and then get out of the way?
Yeah, I think that's the delegation aspect is something that we lose sight of, because there is this like unconscious assumption that because you're the mom, you're in charge of the children. And then, there's the old, feminine, masculine, like traditional gender roles bullshit that all plays a role, right? And I think that, like, disrupting that by asking, like, are you okay? But I think beyond that, and what I want to get deeper into here is about, since we're focusing on here parenting and entrepreneurship and how to be a better parent, we recognize that you're not going to be the best parent that you can be when you are micromanaging, because it's going to put more stress on you. That stress is highly likely to turn into that anger and reactivity that we talked about in the last series. And so I think there's a level of recognition of, like, okay, what are the areas in which I'm not asking for help, and how can I ask for more help? It's something that I've had every single client do, delegating to their partners and to their kids, right? Like, a lot of times we don't give our kids enough credit for what they could do. Cameron does the dishes. Cameron and Brooklyn both do their laundry, like that kind of stuff that is so easily lost sight of, because we just make this assumption that because we're moms, we're supposed to hold it all. And we forget that we have, again, perfectly capable people right next to us. And so there's that aspect of it. But then I also want you to speak to what does it teach children in example that we're setting about like the parents that we're being. What are our children learning from the parenting dynamic?
I think that kids learn collaboration in the same way they learn anything. And if their parents don't model the behavior, they're not going to learn, right? You can teach your kids all day. You can tell them all these things. They're not going to listen to most of them. But when you show them how to do things, they tend to pick up on them a lot faster. And collaboration is one of those things. So when you have a couple, you have parents who don't communicate, who never work together, a kid is going to have a hard time understanding how to collaborate and problem solve in a group or in a pair in this case. So when you have two parents who are willing to have uncomfortable conversations, who are willing to take accountability for the things they do and the way they speak to each other and vow to improve on those things, the kids pick up on it. We've never had a knockdown drag out by any means, but we have had some heated discussions, and we have them not behind closed doors. We have them not intentionally, but because that's where they occurred, in front of the kids. And I think it was important for them to see us have these conversations because it showed them that you can have big emotions and you can still talk to each other in a respectful way that is productive, and you can still come together and come up with a solution even if there's a lot of emotion in that process. So I think it's really important, just like with almost everything else in parenting, we have to lead by example.
Yeah, so children are going to learn by watching more than they learn by listening, which is why we're adamant about we've never yelled at each other in front of we've never yelled at each other, period, actually. Fun fact. But we have had conflict like anybody else, and we think that it was important for us to model conflict resolution as people that didn't see that. So that kind of brings me to my next point, because we have made together a lot of decisions about what we wanted to be an example of for our children. And so I think that there are a lot of people who are like us, right, that come together, that are in love, that have children, and they're raised differently. And so they have different ideas or different values. And maybe there's obviously an overlap there. They probably wouldn't be married. But how do you get on the same page with your parenting to be able to operate as a team?
Stop me if you've heard this one before. Communication. If you don't talk to your partner, it is going to be impossible to collaborate. You have to communicate. And a lot of times these conversations you're going to have are going to be uncomfortable, because when two people with two different backgrounds and two different upbringings get together, they have baggage, not relationship baggage, but baggage from their childhood. They were raised as one way. She was raised one way. I was raised a different way. And sometimes, even if you have a lot of shared values, you are going to butt heads on some things. Some people more than others. Luckily, we haven't had a ton of things, but there's some things we disagree on. You know, even the social media thing. At first, I wanted to continue posting our kids on social media because I'd done it for a long time. And we continued to talk about it because she was the one who brought up the idea that maybe we should stop posting our kids on social media. And I said, come on, I've been doing it for years. But we continued to talk about it. It never was an argument. There was never any negative feelings about it. And over time, after I had enough time to think about it, I changed my mind. And so if you don't bring these things up, and you can't come together, you're going to have to compromise, just like everything else in a relationship. It's not going to be 50-50. There's going to be some things you're going to have to let slide, and some things that your partner is going to have to get over, But at the end of the day, if you don't communicate about these things, if you don't talk to each other and come together and try to figure out solutions for these issues, nothing's ever going to get done.
Yeah, I think that in a lot of households, people will operate independently, and it just creates like, when I'm with mom, I do this. When I'm with dad, I do this. And kids are smart, and they see those gaps. I mean, we are absolutely not perfect, and there's still some things that we do differently, and different ones will run to each of us for different things. But I think it's just the more that you have those conversations to get on the same page. And like every conversation, like I always say, communication doesn't have to be controversial, right? So what are some healthier ways that people can bring up these parenting conflicts without it turning into some sort of blow up?
I would say that context is really important. because I personally don't react very well when you criticize me in front of the kids, or you say, hey, I don't like that in front of the kids. To me, that's not a conversation that they need to see. Like I addressed previously, there's, conflict resolution and stuff, but in the heat of a moment, hey, don't do that. It's like, can we not wait on this?
Yeah.
And usually it's really silly stuff. Like, for example, I love to use real world examples here. I like stuff. She hates stuff. And what I mean by that is, when I was growing up, my dad would take me to the store and buy me an action figure. That was, or some football cards or something. So I do that with Cam. Now, I will say I've gotten a lot better. I used to buy them all sorts of stuff that they would inevitably break. And I was like, what the heck? And I didn't learn my lesson for like 9 years, basically. But eventually I figured it out that they don't take care of any of the stuff they get. So I've tempered that. But initially, the way things were brought up, it wasn't that productive. And this is something that she's taken accountability for over the years. Like, I need to work better on bringing these things up. So I think it's context, the moment, and also the delivery. I think your tone, I think the way you say things is so important. Even if you don't want to wait until you're in private to talk about these things, just addressing them in a respectful way means so much more. Especially if it's a hot button issue. If you know that your partner was raised a certain way and they're having a hard time breaking a certain habit, just wait until you guys have some alone time and you can talk about it and brainstorm together.
Yeah, I think what we've learned in our communication, which we did a whole episode on that in the marriage series, if you go back quite a few episodes now, but I think that's, for me, learning delivery was always hard because I'm so direct and I'm just like it can come off as cold, right? And so figuring out how to approach things and then how to also inquire and find out why is that important to you? When you get them dressed that way, or when you pick out those shoes, or when you buy those things, why is that? And so I think that's how you find compromise of let's talk about these things. But the only way that you can get on the same page as parents and operate as a team is if you're talking to each other, and if you're not avoiding things. Like, if you see something that your partner does with your kids or doesn't do, or isn't showing up, if you're shouldering all the load and they're not helping, you have to go to yourself first and be like, well, am I asking for what I need? And am I communicating to them about why that's important to me? And so a lot of the stuff I've had to learn a lot, to let a lot of stuff go, to where I'm like, does that really matter? Is that really that important? Or am I just trying to control everything because that makes me feel safe when I think that I do that?
Yeah. And you talked about the questions you ask. Why is that important to your partner? But you should also ask, why does that bother me so much?
Yeah.
Why does that rub me the wrong way?
Yeah.
And just like when we talked about in the first episode about, going to the past, they have a reason for liking a certain thing, and you probably have a reason for not liking, or maybe not. Maybe you don't have a dislike for it, but maybe you just don't understand it. So you cannot understand somebody without talking to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, for us, it's having the shared goal of who we want to be as parents. And so for us, we share the goal of being parents who are long-term focused. We want to create children who become incredible humans so that they can make the world a better place. That's really what it comes down to. And so what do we have to do to lead by example? Well, we have to do that first, so that we're modeling that behavior. In order to approach things that don't feel good in your partnership, if you feel things are uneven in your parenting duties, you need to take responsibility for your communication, and you need to approach those things and have a conversation about it, and what would be helpful, and help them understand the load that you're carrying as a mother and a business owner. Because sometimes, again, it just comes back to our fear of asking for help because we feel so guilty, because we feel like we're already not doing enough. But if you can release that, and this is something that I had to work really hard on, is with Eric being so involved with our kids and him doing the majority of the drop-offs and the pickups and stuff like that, it was just okay, well, what are the things that are important for me with my kids? And it's I'm not a bad mom because I don't pick my kids up from school every single day. I'm not a bad mom because, I sometimes work when they don't have school. So I think it's just evaluating those things and letting your partner become like step up and become more confident, because good dads want to play an active role. So on that topic, what should moms, when they're listening to this, if their partner is maybe not pulling their weight when it comes to parenting responsibilities, right? And they are not really expressing any sort of interest in becoming more involved or changing their patterns to get on the same page, what would you recommend?
Speaking from the man's perspective, I have to say, I'm going to defend the men here, that it isn't always a case of not holding up our end of the bargain. Some of us are not as detail oriented or as aware as our partners. And speaking for Kelsey and I, sometimes I just need to be told what needs to be done. A lot of times I can figure it out myself, but there are some things that I lose track of, and that's a totally normal thing. It's going to happen to you. Your life's busy as a man, as a husband, as a father, you got a lot on your plate. You're going to forget stuff, but you also have to be receptive. You have to be, as a man, as a father, you have to be able to receive this constructive criticism, this feedback from your partner without getting defensive, without getting offended, because it's really easy. We have a lot of pride. We care a lot about what we do. So when somebody tells us that we're not holding up our end of the bargain, or if we internalize it like that anyways, we can get upset. So you really need to listen, which we keep going back to the communication thing, but it's the drum we have to keep beating, because if you don't communicate, you will not have a successful relationship. Simple as that. So as a man, if I'm not holding my end of the bargain, and I can't speak for women, but if you think your husband needs to tighten up, it's up to you to tell him that. Don't be passive aggressive. Don't start resenting him and holding everything inside. Don't do it for him, because we all know, every man knows when we've let something go too far, because you'll start to do it, and then we'll see you do it and we'll say, shit, I should have done that. And the worst thing a husband can even ever see is their wife taking out the trash, because you're like, she just asked me to do that. I forgot. Oh my God. Or something, it could be anything. But when the wife does it, it's just like, oh crap, I messed up. So you got to be aware as a man, but as a woman, as a wife, you have to speak up. You cannot be afraid to tell your husband in a respectful manner, tone, hey, I have a lot on my plate, and there's some things that you could do that would help lighten my load. I know you got a lot of stuff going on, but hopefully you have enough time to do these things for me, because it would help me out a lot. Simple as that.
Yeah. It goes back to asking for help. And I think there's a level of like, if you are in a relationship that is committed and you truly love each other, like when they come to you for help, of course you're going to step up. And so I think a lot of it does fall on us as moms, because it is like we feel guilty because we're not doing enough. And so I think that an important takeaway from today is like allowing yourself to release that guilt that you may feel about what you thought motherhood was supposed to look like, and actually allowing your partner to support you, and actually asking for the things that may not be traditional gender roles or whatever, and letting yourself be supported in the areas so that you can actually be the mom that you want to be. So, in speaking of like the mom you want to be, what do you think a strong co-parenting dynamic looks like, especially in a household where at least one of the people is running a busy business?
I think effective communication when it comes to duties of the house, child stuff, any of that. Once again, communication, 100%. If you have a busy day with your business, you're not going to be able to do everything. Stop trying to do everything. You're going to drive yourself nuts. You're going to need to delegate tasks, just like you delegate to your employees. We're not your employee. Don't treat us like one, but we're not afraid to shoulder some load if we need to. So you got to ask for help when you need it, and it's a collaborative thing. We have to plan too. We have weekly planning sessions. We always compare and contrast our calendars. We make sure all of our appointments are in there, because when you have multiple kids and you have a business, it's a lot to juggle. And so communication is really important. Planning is really important. And you need to make sure you're both on the same page 100% of the time, because you don't want to be that dad that forgets to pick their kid up from school. I'm not speaking from experience. I'm good on that.
That has never happened.
I have forgotten to take Emmy to gymnastics. I have done that a couple times, but never.
Not today, though.
Not today. I remember.
Not today. We're going to gymnastics.
I was like, gymnastics today. I'm taking her. Gymnastics. Just don't forget gymnastics. It's summer, so everything, the routine's out the window right now. So it's done.
Yeah, it's a lot to manage, and that's the reality. And so I think you speak to, obviously, communication is always the front line. Like, the more that you talk to each other, and not even like when we go back to our communication, like it's not even necessarily that you have to talk to each other for 5 hours a day. It's about the quality of the conversation and just making sure that it's impactful. So like having our weekly marriage check-ins, but also having a weekly planning session, those two things, really we could do either of those things if we just like didn't go down rabbit holes and stuff in like 30 minutes. We're fortunate to have built lives where we can sit and talk for a couple hours. And so with that, I think that element of like actually focusing on being organized, because if you don't have like, we have systems in our business, right? And we have processes in our business. And if you don't have systems and organization in your home where you are delegating, again, to your partner, to your children, if people do not know what their assigned tasks are or where they're supposed to be when, it's going to be a shit show. And that shit show is going to weigh on you mentally. So I would also say, not only do you want to communicate, but make sure that you're communicating about the shit that matters. Yep. Make sure you're communicating about the things that, you know, logistically need to be changed or moved around, but also being on the same page means that you're asking the right questions and that you're taking the 20 or 30 minutes to actually plan. Here's what we're doing. Here's what it looks like. This is where I need you.
Yeah, when you talk about systems, if you don't have a shared calendar, whether it's like a physical, like real calendar, like on your wall or your fridge, or a Google calendar, you're messing up. Yeah. If you have one kid, and you should have a Google calendar, and the more kids you have, the more important that kind of system becomes, because there's going to be a lot of doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, gymnastics, basketball, all sorts of things. Plus your life, you're going to have stuff to take care of as well. And nothing's worse than when you double book and you have to cancel something you're really looking forward to because there was some other obligation.
Yeah, 100%. So I think today has been really important for us to really better understand how we can co-parent better and how we can be on the same team, and how important communication and organization really plays a role for that. And more than anything, permission slip for all of my moms out there to ask your partners for more help, and ask for help in areas where you feel fear and uncertainty that they may not be capable, and let them do it wrong. Let them do it differently. And what is the worst thing that happens, right? Again, they put on the wrong shoes, the kid shows up to school in the wrong uniform. Like, that shit doesn't matter. It really doesn't, because when you can release the mental load of trying to carry it all yourself, of trying to do all the school planning and the school supplies and the meetings and the activities and the coordinating and the planning and the vacations and it is so much that we try to do. And if we feel stressed because we're carrying too much, it's because we're saying yes to all those things. So you do not need to feel guilty for handing things over that are technically your responsibility.
Kids develop confidence by doing things themselves. If you are a helicopter mom and you constantly hover over your kids and do everything for them, they're never going to learn how to do things themselves, and they're never going to develop that confidence in themselves. Even if you're a confident man, the first time you have a kid is the first time you're a dad. It's uncharted territory. So in order to build confidence, in order for us to build confidence, we have to do things by ourselves. Even if we need, a little pointer here or there's cool, after the fact, it's great. But you have to let us try, because that's how we build confidence as fathers. And that's how, once we get it down, kid 2, kid 3, it's easy.
Yeah. Kid 3. Third time is the charm. There is a drastic
charm,
difference.
that's a word for it.
Our third kid is currently 3, so we're in the demonic stage.
People go, what's the difference between 1, 2, 3? And after 2, I think that any parent with multiple kids can speak to this. It doesn't get easier. You just know what to expect. So nothing surprises you. It's just as hard. It's just as challenging, but at least you've seen this all before.
Okay, so on the first part of the series, we talked all about anger and reactivity and how to understand and better handle that. Today, we talked all about being a better team player and being the example for your children and what it takes to do that. And on the last part of this series, we are going to actually talk all about how to parent through pressure. So what a lot of people don't realize unless you're in it is being an entrepreneur and being a parent are the 2 hardest paths. And so while we have discussed the things that sometimes can come from this, which is the anger and the reactivity and things that we need to do as parents, I want to talk with Eric about what we can do to actually parent through this pressure we feel. We're going to talk tools. We're going to talk techniques. We're going to talk communication with our kids. And that's going to be a really tactical episode for you guys. So we will see you guys next week for that episode. If you guys want to learn more about working with Eric, if you have a husband who is an angry dad and wants to stop yelling and you want to create a more calm and peaceful household, we will put the link in the show notes for you to have your husband contact him. Please do not do it for him, as Eric stated. And we will talk to you guys next week. Thanks for joining us.